There are a lot of changes that The Last of Us Season 2 has made, and being honest, most of them I don't like. But Season 2, Episode 6 did what I thought was impossible and somehow improves upon what I consider to be one of the best parts of the game. And it did so by adding completely new material. The entire sequence between Joel, Ellie, and Eugene is a brief but very welcome return to form, exhibiting the quality of some of the best storytelling that Season 1 had to offer. But what makes the sequence between Joel and Eugene work while so many other scenes seem to fail? Well, there is a combination of writing techniques at play, some obvious and others more subtle, yet the most important aspect of the scene's success comes from understanding narrative conflict and tension. My goal today is to break down the writing within so that you can use it in your own work, or possibly just gain a deeper appreciation for great writing in general. I have been a novel and script editor for almost a decade now, so if you like what you hear and want me to look at your work, head on over to savagebooks.net and look over my services. Lastly, I'm also an author with 5 fantasy books available for purchase, and a whole channel dedicated to exploring my characters and my world through beautiful handmade art. You can find links to my books and my new channel below as well. But getting back to The Last of Us, the very first thing that we can start our breakdown with is by looking at the scene structurally. I've gone over this in a few of my dialogue dives in the past, but all stories have a structure that can be broken down further and further. For example, The Last of Us video games as a complete narrative are told in a 2-act structure, Act 1 being the first game and Act 2 being the second game. However, if we look at The Last of Us 2 as an individual story, it's actually told in a 4-act structure. Yet, even further inside those acts are individual scenes that can be broken down into acts themselves. Now, you may be thinking, wait, if individual scenes are structured the same way as whole stories, what's the difference between them? Well, that's the fun part. There isn't. Well-written scenes are essentially just short stories. And that is one of the reasons these scenes with Eugene work so well. It can be watched as its own standalone short story without any outside context. Let's take a look. The scene can be broken down into 3 main acts, each one happening at a different location. This makes things really easy for us because 3-act structures are the most common in fiction and the most easily understood. Act 1 is called the introduction and has the job of introducing our characters and establishing the conflict they are dealing with. Since Ellie and Joel are already very much established, the only work to be done here is with Eugene. And in a good introduction, the audience is meant to become invested in the new characters, or at least think they're cool. Thinking they're cool comes from, them doing something really awesome.
Your ass on your feet.
But getting an audience invested in a character, actually caring about them, is a bit more difficult. However, there are a few really subtle but cool writing tricks that immediately make us like Eugene, and therefore make us as an audience invested in him. First, he is honest about his infected injury.
You clean?
No.
It may seem super small, but Eugene almost immediately telling Joel and Ellie about his genuine circumstances tells the audience that he's an honest, trustworthy man. The next thing he does is not think about himself, but think about his wife, even in his most dire hour.
We go back to the gate. They let Gail out, keeping her at a safe distance, of course, and I say goodbye.
We all have loved ones that we would want to see before we die, so we can easily understand this and empathize. But then maybe biggest of all, Eugene tries to defend himself but surrenders when he fails.
You're empty.
No, Joe, I gotta go back. I gotta see her.
Just from a character creation standpoint, this signals to us that Eugene isn't a threat, and his reaction to his failure makes him very relatable. Keep in mind, all this characterization is simultaneously happening while establishing the conflict. To keep things as simple as possible, narrative conflict is whatever is standing in the way of the characters achieving their goal. Eugene's goal is to see his wife again, and his conflict is twofold. He has to reach his wife before the cordyceps destroys his mind, and he has to convince Joel and Ellie to bring him back to Jackson and get his wife to meet him. Eugene is introduced here in order to be the forking path for Ellie and Joel. If you really get down to it, his character only exists to push Ellie and Joel further into their development. But Eugene is handled so genuinely and organically that he never once feels out of place or shoehorned in. Considering the introduction again, Joel's goal is established as the safety of Jackson from infection, placing him in opposition to Eugene. Ellie's goal is parallel with Eugene's. She wants to see him with his wife. The first act ends upon the agreement of a compromise between all parties, where everyone seems to get what they want. The second act, also known as the rising action, is where things really get going though. The second act is traditionally where the introductory qualities of the character are expanded upon and deepened. We get to see that Joel's promise in the introduction,
a promise,
means nothing, and that he's a liar. And we get to see the depth and craving that Eugene has to see his wife.
I need Gail. To see her face, please.
The sustained tension of this scene is whether or not Eugene can convince Joel to spare his life, but inevitably, the second act ends on a very dark note, which is typical for the structure. This is why in most trilogies, it is the second installment that often ends in the bleakest spot. Think of Pirates of the Caribbean literally ending with Jack Sparrow's death, or Luke Skywalker losing his hand in a duel with Vader in The Empire Strikes Back. This often occurs so that there is the greatest amount of tension, stakes, and consequences going into the third act. And speaking of, we are now at the climax, meeting with Gale. Now, most people would think that Joel shooting Eugene would be the climax of these scenes, but that's because the writing is so clever and organic. Remember, this whole conflict with Eugene is simply a narrative tool to explicate and move forward Joel and Ellie's development and relationship. Therefore, the climax isn't Eugene's death. The climax is Joel and Ellie's response to Eugene's death. This is where we get to see Joel and Ellie in the greatest tension in relation to their conflict. And if we take a step back from these scenes to look at the greater narrative of Season 2, we can see that Ellie and Joel's conflicts are diametrically opposed. Ellie's goal is to live in truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is, while Joel's goal is to live in a lie in order to avoid discomfort. And this is why this scene with Eugene works so well. Even though it can stand alone as a self-contained short story, it works perfectly as an allegory to the main conflict of the season and links back to our characters and their progression perfectly. And this can be recognized by the writer's choice to have Ellie tie the emotional climax of the scene to the emotional climax of the overarching conflict.
Swear to me that everything you said about the Fireflies is true.
I swear.
You swore.
It all links back up. Joel will effortlessly kill and lie if it's for what he perceives as the greater good. And Ellie, seeing this firsthand, gives her the sad answer to the questions she has been struggling with for years. Joel sends her down the mountain path and strips her of all choice and agency with Eugene, just like he did at the hospital. He lies about Eugene. He expects Ellie to lie along with him simply because it'll be easier to explain, just like he did with Marlene and the Fireflies. And it's in that moment that Ellie realizes that Joel isn't lying about the Fireflies for her sake. He's lying because he's afraid of the consequences of the truth. The reason these scenes work so well, aside from the characterization and the tragedy of it, is that they do not stray from what we care about. They deepen it. That's the problem with so many other scenes this season. I don't really care about Jackson getting attacked because at the same time, I want to get back to Joel being with the people who want to murder him because I care about Joel, not Jackson. I don't really care about Ellie fighting with the city council because I want her to get her revenge mission going, because I care about Joel and Ellie, not the city council. I don't care about a random group of scars getting attacked because I care about finding Abby, because Abby hurt those we cared about, Joel and Ellie. The central conflict of this season, whether the show knows it or not, is grief and revenge, and what you are willing to sacrifice because of them. They took one of our main characters from us, killed him in front of us, putting us in the same shoes as Ellie. She is our audience insert, enacting harm against the people who wronged us. That's what we want to see. That's what we're invested in. But more than that, we are invested in learning just how deeply Ellie was hurt because of what happened over the 4 years that we didn't see. The only thing really worth exploring, especially in a 7-episode season, is the struggle that Ellie feels on her path of vengeance, along with the struggles of those who support her. Ellie's best scenes are those that deal with her trauma and anger and loss, either directly or indirectly. And while not everything has to be dour and depressing, it does seem like a shame that more of season 2 isn't focused on what made it so alluring in the first place. Anyway, thanks for watching all the way until the end. If you like what you heard, make sure to check out my website for editing services and my books, and make sure to check out my new channel, Blood of One's Blood series, to learn about my world and see some beautiful handmade art. As always, it was a pleasure, and I will talk to you all again soon.